When I was first hired to direct Get Smart, I had not a big resume. I had been doing the Patty Duke show, and my basic experience was 10 years as an assistant director. My favorite show being the Andy Griffith Show. I was there the first few years. I saw the pilot and it was hysterical. And Jay Sandrich, who was producing it, was a friend. We had both been assistant directors at Desilu. And he hired me to do 3 after he saw that we were all on the same lot. You know, Patty Duke was down here and Get Smart was over there. So I came on the show. It was the first show I had ever done in color. Everything had been black and white. Even the pilot of Get Smart was in black and white. And it was a show, and the script was great, and there were good gags, and there was a big shootout scene in a hotel lobby where everybody was a spy from one side and the other, and they all started shooting each other. And the way I did it kept me on the show. They loved what I did in that sequence. And that was the beginning. I ended up doing 24 episodes of it. And it certainly boosted my career because the show was an immediate hit and a cult thing, and all the would you believes and sorry about that, chief, and missed it by that much, all became popular sayings. So it was great. And we had a very good time. Now, of course, when you first do a show, you don't know how it's going to look by the time you get finished. And but it came out well. It was well received, and I was hired to do more. And as I said, I ended up doing, I think, 24 episodes of Get Smart over the years. And I was very lucky. I actually ended up, I have a book, which I had a number on every page, and every page was a show, and there are 397 pages. So I was very fortunate to have a really lucky career. I think the 3rd year I was directing, and I was doing only comedy, I only did 13 episodes, and I thought my career was ending. Nowadays, 13 episodes is a terrific year. But there was a cadre of sitcom directors, and it was a rather small community, and we would go, you know, from show to show to show. So when I was doing Get Smart, it wasn't like a tape show today where a guy can do them all, you know, where Jim Brooks can do every episode for years. So you'd be hired for 3, usually. And then, so you'd do 3 Get Smarts, then you'd go over and do 3 Hogan's Heroes. Maybe you'd go to Please Don't Eat the Daisies or the Partridge Family, whatever it was. And it, to show you how small the community was, at one point, John Rich, who was Mr. Independent and never had an agent and always got paid over scale, was making more money than anybody. And we were all working for scale at that time. I think it was $1,500 an episode. And we wanted $1,750. So we got together in Gary Nelson's living room. And there were 17 guys. And we were the comedy directors. We were the sitcom directors. And we said, this is what we're going to do. And we did it. It was not a strike. It was not anything but saying, this is our price now. It was not through the guild. And it showed us what a small community we were. It was amazing. Gary Nelson and I were the 2 main directors of Get Smart in the first years. He and I came from the same place. We were both assistant directors for many years successfully. We both were mentored by a man named Bob Sweeney, who gave us our opportunity to become directors. We were both given by Bob Sweeney episodes of the Patty Duke Show, which was our beginning. And that was the year Get Smart started. And Gary and I both got on it and both did well. And by the third year, we were sort of the regular directors. There was one review that said, Get Smart is getting stale with these old directors. They should get some fresh new guys. Neither one of us was 40 years old yet. We were both in our 30s, he earlier than I. We went back to my first job as a second assistant director. I was replacing Gary Nelson on a show called Wyatt Earp. That was a long time ago. And we've known each other since, and we've done similar jobs. Certainly in our early careers, we did all the same shows. Gary went more into long form than I did, and did a couple of features and so on. The only time it was really competitive is when they did a Get Smart feature and they hired him instead of me. But then I saw the movie, and so I wasn't jealous anymore. It was terrible. They couldn't put it back together. And a big part of that was Ed Platt. Ed Platt, who played the chief, was just wonderful at it. And when he passed away, it was just a great, great loss to the Get Smart family, because he had that way of dealing with Max. And aside from the scenes he would be not in the office, and he was in a lot, every Friday night was the Friday night frolics in the chief's office with Don and Barbara and whoever else happened to be around. And in the early days, Ed always came in completely prepared, having memorized everything. But Don had a habit of changing or mispronouncing words the first time he read them in a script. So if a guy's name was McDougal, he might change it. He says, oh, McGonagall. And then it was McGonagall. So now it comes to Ed, and he says, well, you know, Commander McDougal. And I said, Ed, you can't. It's got to be McGonagall. It's been the whole show. So he started not preparing quite the same way, with his trigger cocked, ready to go whichever way Don had gone. And but those scenes and his relationship with Don were one of the most important things that made it work, because he had the patience and he accepted that Don got it done, you know, and took him for what he was worth. There was a lot of looking for a new joke, and there would be something that Don felt mostly came from Don. Don was so good and so bright and so funny, and he'd say, can we do something here? And so we'd all go in the corner, usually Don and myself and the script supervisor, a girl named Dottie. And so we'd say, how about this? Ba-dum, 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 ba-dum. And Dottie would go, you know, that's not it. So then, until finally we got to the joke where we said, this, and Dottie kind of went, huh? That was it. So she was a wonderful yardstick for us, and a lot of wonderful jokes came out of those things on the set. Now, sometimes we'd get to a point where we couldn't agree, and then Leonard Stern would come down and we'd work it out between us. But not a lot of improvisation until Rickles came. And I didn't do that show, but I understand when Rickles and Don Adams got on the stage together, it was just stand back. And it became a two-parter. He was hired for a half hour. That's what I remember, and I wasn't really around. The night we won the Emmy, which was a big night, it happened to be my 40th birthday, but I won for directing, Don won for acting, and Burt Nodella, who is a very good friend who I went to school with, won as the producer of the show. And Rickles was at the table. And it was just a very big night for Get Smart. And that's the night that this came around. And Don came back with it from winning and sat down at the table. And Rickles said something, and Don turned to him. And as he turned to him, he sat down, and this thing went like that. It got him. It was really almost dangerous. It just drew a little blood, because he was sitting down with his full weight, and this was sitting on the table. And that was a pretty scary, interesting time. Burt and I both went to UCLA. both, he was more an actor, writer kind of guy, and I was a motion picture guy and was into making my student film and so on. But he came to Get Smart, I think the third year. And he came in and sat down next to me in our little director's chairs, a director, producer, and he had a call sheet in his hand, and he said, "Bruce, did you ever think when we were at UCLA?" Producer Bert Nodella, director Bruce Bilson. And that was a special time for us, special little moment, and we're still very good friends. The Cone of Silence. In the 24 shows I did, I only used it once. It was a scene where, and it's always Max insists on it, and a perfect example of Ed Platt. Oh, you know, do we have to? And I can't do it, and nobody else could. But he had that way at pained, all right, I'll give in. And so the Cone of Silence was lowered, and in the episode I was doing, it came and just kept coming and went through the desk, and they both ended up huddled on the floor under it. And that was great, a great gag. There was always something new, and it always had to work. And we had a property master named Jimmy something, and I apologize to his family if I don't remember his name, if they ever see this. But he was great. And one of the things he did, he took an old doorbell button, and he just took the button, the little white button with a little brass ring around it, and put some tape on the back of it. And whenever something had to work, he would put that button where you needed it, and when Don pressed it or the bad guy pressed it, whatever was supposed to happen happened. And that saved just so much technical baloney, you know, and he just had that simple solution that worked. And, you know, you talk about gags. I suppose the other biggest gag was Jaime the Robot. And I did his first show, you know, give me a hand, Jaime. All that. And Dick was great, Dick Gautier. I saw him recently. I'm sorry to say it was at Don's funeral, but he was there. Everybody was there. The whole comedy world was at Don Adams' funeral. It was a wonderful, it wasn't a funeral, it was his memorial service. But Jaime the Robot, you know, and then we found gags. And, you know, you ask about gags that happen. One episode I had, Jaime had been reprogrammed by chaos to be a bad robot. And Don was trying to fix him, and I opened a sequence. We had a gag that went on Dick Gautier that opened up and had all the little stuff in it. And Don was in there trying to fix it with a screwdriver. And the prop man came up and whispered in my ear one of my favorite jokes. So while Don was doing that and the camera was pulling back, he said, "Cough, Jaime." And the robot went, and just a wonderful joke that came from that same prop man, Jimmy. So those kind of things happened upon occasion. When you had the prop, sometimes you could find a thing to do with it. There was a show where Don and Barbara were supposed to get drowned in a phone booth. And that episode started with another person, a lady who was trying to be an informer in that very same phone booth. And as she was trying to become an informer, the bad guys came to a wheel in the hall and turned it like this, and that thing flooded with water, and she was a goner. And that was the teaser of the show. Later on, Don and Barbara got into that same phone booth, and the bad guy was ready to turn and drown them. But the problem was we had a page-and-a-half scene while the thing was filling up. So I had to control the timing of how that phone booth filled up. Actually, it was a tank that was made. They had to climb in over the top, and the door was a fake and all that. It was very well done. I had two cameras, one wide holding the whole thing, another one closer on Don and Barbara. And we started the scene, and I needed cues to control the level of the water. So I got the special effects man, and he was in the next stage through a door because the pump made noise, and he had a tank of warm water for them, and he was ready. And we went through the script, And I gave him 5 cues. You know, one is here, 2 is here, 3, 4, 5. Right? And just watch my hand. Now I'm here, I've got the script, and I'm ducked down under the camera, and we start rolling, and it's working, and it's great. And I cue the 1, the water's coming, and I cue 2, and this scene is playing, and the shoe phone is wet, and he's looking for change for a quarter, and it's going, and it's fine, and I'm going along, and I get to the 5th cue, and then I stop worrying about this hand, and I'm watching, and I'm laughing, because it's really funny, but he's watching my hand, and I can't laugh out loud, so I'm going, and all of a sudden, he thinks I want more, and he just keeps the water coming and blew them right out of the phone booth. Not that they were hurt, but I mean, they floated to the top. And now the wardrobe had to be redone, and the hair, and the makeup, and the whole thing. But it was just one of those funny coincidences, the way it worked out. It's a favorite story of mine. Don was an incredible memorizer of lines. Don was not a homework doer. Don was a wonderful, and here's how it worked. Don and Barbara would come into a room, and Barbara would say, "Gee, Max, this looks like the museum basement." And Don would say, "Dottie," and Dottie, the script supervisor, would read his line, "Well, 99, maybe it is." And then Barbara would say her next line, and Don would say, "Dottie," and Dottie would read his next line. And by the time he went through the scene, the next time he was practically perfect, and by the time, you know, the next rehearsal, and by the time he got to a take, he had it. It was incredible. It was not that he was a bad learner. It's that he was a bad homework doer. But he could do that. And one rehearsal like that, and he was on the way. It was quite amazing, really. Well, you know, Don was a Marine, and Don was physical and was proud of it. And there was a part of him that was Maxwell Smart, and there was a little bit of him that was James Bond, you know. So being James Bond and keeping the comedy was what it was about. That was what our show was. It was a takeoff on James Bond, because that had just become such a huge hit. We were rehearsing, and as I recall, it's supposed to be a construction site of a building or something. But anyhow, the stunt coordinator orchestrated it, and we rehearsed it because the other actor was in it. It was the 2 principals, if I remember correctly. And I said, "Guys, just go through it by the numbers so you know who ducks, where it goes, what happens, all the things." And they started that way, and Don started picking up the speed. And suddenly it was a full speed, and his head was coming this way, and the other guy's fist was coming that way, and crack, it just got his nose, and that was it. It was a rehearsal. It wasn't even on film. And that's what happened. He got into it. Agent 44, that was Victor French. Victor French and Don Adams had this thing of 2 kids having an argument. They had this wonderful thing together of, "I don't like being in this porthole," you know, one of those things. But they were both so honestly petulant, and it was just really a joy. Victor was a very good friend, and he was so good in it, it led to his own show, short-lived, called The Hero, and then eventually he had the wonderful Western career with Little House and so on. But he was a good guy and a good friend, and so good in that part. And he came on the show on my first episode, and he knocked on the door. Dawn was keeping the secret agent something in her apartment, and a knock at the door came, and it was Victor French in a fedora hat and suit. And Don opened the door, you know, with a million locks on it. "Yes?" He says, "How do you do? I'm your friendly insurance agent." And Don says, "Oh, Mr. Insurance Agent, come right in." And Victor walked in, and I whack him in the back, and pow, he fell on the ground. And I said to Vic, I said, "Try to hit the ground like you're being pulled down by a bungee cord." And he just went splat. And from then on, his performance in that led to him getting that other job of being a regular on the show, and he was great. And then Dave Ketchum was different. He was very, very good. But Victor and Don had something that was like two little kids having an argument. It was delicious. I think it was written funny. You're talking about Buck Henry. You're talking about four teams of really terrific writers whose, I don't want to name one and not be able to name the other seven, or, Leonard Stern, who just had it down of what Get Smart was, and Don. And so when those things were there, you just played them for what they were. There was no problem. We all knew what they were, and we just did it. And Don brought all those phrases, I think, from Would You Believe, which was interesting. In the pilot, it was 3 steps. It was, you're surrounded by the U.S. Navy, the Coast Guard or something. And the guy says, I find that hard to believe. He says, would you believe 2 destroyers and a speedboat? And he says, and then he'd say, I find that hard to believe. He says, how about 6 Boy Scouts in a rowboat? Would you believe? Would you believe? And it became a 2-step. The 3 became a 2. It was interesting. But all those other things, sorry about that, Chief, missed it by that much. Barbara, of course, was wonderful because she, like Ed Platt, had just the right attitude. And she drove that line, walked that line, admiring him, helping him. Oh, Max, all of that. And of course, they each had their favorite side of the camera, I don't know if you're aware of it. So sometimes they'd come into a room and go like this and switch sides. If I remember correctly, Don wanted to be looking camera right and Barbara camera left. Fortunately, they weren't fighting for the same side. And so you'll see that if you really look for that they're usually on the same sides of the screen. And Barbara would stand with her ankles bent because she was in real life taller than Don and didn't want to be. And so she had a lot of times standing with her feet out and her ankles bent to be a little shorter. Barbara Feldon is a very bright woman, to where she won the $64,000 question once before she came on our show. And very bright, very knowledgeable about investments. She was buying gold when it was $35 an ounce. It's now, what, 600? And, the other thing, so I think everything she did with intelligence. And the other thing is the wardrobe. Get Smart was a very fashionable show. Don had those terrific suits, and she had all that fancy designer clothes. They were a big deal. Some of them looked a little weird to me, but they were the fashion of the day. And she was very well dressed. And I think that may be part of what young ladies of the world admired about her, as well as the fact that she was holding up her half of that combo of controlled spies, the two of them. Barbara was very bright, but she was not a physical fighter. That's not where her strength lay, with shooting guns and karate chops were not her cup of tea. She did them, but she was not Emma Peel. I have to say that at Don's funeral, Barbara made the most touching speech of anybody. Of the 2 Don Adams, the one she knew as Maxwell Smart and the one she knew as Don Adams, was really just bring tear to your eyes tribute that she did. She's such a lady, and that was another example of it. Well, all those characters that we portrayed that maybe would not be politically correct today were just funny. I mean, yes, they were satirical. Satire was a big part of the show. We attacked almost anything with characters and with dialogue and names of places and people. And one of my favorites was The Man from Yenta. There was a television show called The Man from U.N.C.L.E., and this was Get Smart's take on that. And The Man from Yenta was an Israeli spy who was sent to guard an Arab sheikh who had been threatened by chaos, and they knew that, well, the guy's name was something Lamoko, was the bad guy who was an incredible imitator of voices and of disguises, an expert in disguise. And so it ended up with this scene where the sheik was there, and this was everybody with the dark glasses and the burnoose thing, whatever you call it, and a mustache, a little goatee. And he was there, the real sheik, and the man from Yenta had the same outfit on with the little beard, and Pepe Lamoko, whatever the hell the guy's name was, the master of disguise and voice, he was there with the same outfit, and Don Adams, in trying to protect the real guy, was there in the same outfit. And they all got into a fist fight. And they're rolling around on the floor, and the chief comes in and says, "All right, on your feet." And that was the scene. And then he said, he said, "Number one." It turned into this funny thing. "Number one, what is your name?" And he said, "I am Sheikh Alu Ben Bubi." "Number two, what is your name?" "I am Sheikh." And the four guys all answered the same. And we had this hysterical scene that evolved as a takeoff on that television show, which wasn't written that way quite. It just evolved into it. It was hysterical. And in the middle of it all, the guy who played the real sheik said, "You know, I'm working in a play tonight, so I've got to get out of here." So I carefully planned my coverage, and I said, "Okay, go." And then all of a sudden I turned around for a shot, and I needed him. And I called the gate, and the cop at the gate stopped him. They brought him back. They slapped this stuff, this beard, this thing, boom, and we got it. But it was one of those very, very, very funny scenes that played better than it was written. It just took off on its own. And that's been a favorite show of mine. I did the first episode with Siegfried where he was a magician. And that was the beginning. And one of our favorite scenes, Siegfried kidnapped the chief. And there was this phone call. And there was some discussion about the jokes, and I think Leonard Stern came up with this. It was hysterical. So Siegfried calls and says, "Very smart, I have your chief." And the chief says, "Don't give him anything, Max." And they hit the chief with a gun, and he goes, "Ah!" And Don's on the phone. He says, "What was that?" And Siegfried says, "Your chief was just silenced by a pistol butt." And Don said, "Couldn't you just shush him?" And Siegfried says, "We don't shush here." And that was just this lovely joke that was a favorite. And we often said, "We don't shush here," about anything after that, just on the show. Not in the show, but on the show, those of us working there. Starker, a guy named King Moody, was Siegfried's right-hand man. And he was a really nice guy and did a good job, but what's really interesting is when Get Smart folded, he became Ronald McDonald. He was the guy, Starker, and that always tickled me. And I could never recognize him. I'd look at Ronald McDonald. Is that really King Moody? But anyhow, that's just a little piece of lore. First of all, I took away a great big career leap because it was a hit show. And Gary Nelson and I both were new directors, basically. We had done the Patty Duke Show and a couple of episodes of a thing called The Baileys of Balboa, which we both worked on as production people. And then I won an Emmy. I took this away. I took this away from Get Smart. Uh, I took away, I think, a way of telling jokes for myself. And I took away the fact that I did get smart. And that was just one of those shows that was special. I have a few in my career that I call, being assistant director on the Andy Griffith Show was special at the beginning, you know. There are shows like that where it's a hit and you know it and you love it, and you work just as hard. You work just as hard on The Partridge Family or some show that never got on the air at all, which I've done a few of, that were canceled before my episode ever got there. And you work just as hard or harder. So when you get that good show and you get that good script, it's a wonderful thing to enjoy and take with you the rest of your life.